who's going to talk about her experience over the last 30 years working in the domestic violence field.
That's correct. So I have been working in human services for over 30 years. And I did 13 years in a program a larger program in the northwest corner, and I'm currently working in a small program way up on the border of the Connecticut and New York. Working in this field has been my passion. I am a formerly battered woman, and it's just my passion, and I was fortunate enough to be able to come back and do this work and work directly with victims and survivors going to close out my career and retire from there. I did do some HIV and AIDS work and some substance abuse work over in between, and that just led to me being a better advocate and being able to safety plan better with women who had issues around HIV and AIDS, who had issues with substance abuse because they can't be safe if they can't be med compliant, and sometimes abusers wouldn't let them take their meds. Also with substance abuse, if they're coping with substance, the police get called, they can't really be safe there because oftentimes if both people are highly intoxicated or under the influence, they can arrest both parties and let the courts figure it out. So I was able to take my knowledge there and work with women around harm reduction so that if the police got called, they at least could articulate and give statements as to what happened. So all that just has broadened my expertise and ability to assist and empower women who are being abused. So I think they want to look at sort of what it was like in 1986 when I started and kind of where we are today. So I'll say that in 1986, I started in the domestic violence field, or from my perspective, the battered women's movement, as the first victim advocate in the state. In 1986, the Family Violence Prevention and Response Act went into effect. And oftentimes you'll hear this referred to as the DV law or the Tracy Thurman law, because the Thurman case happened a few years prior to this law being passed, and that case certainly pushed it through legislation, which was desperately needed at the time. And the law, basically, I'll just give a quick brief overview of that, was that police must make an arrest if they had probable cause. And prior to that, not just Torrington Police, every police department in the state would go to a domestic violence incident and, take the guy for a walk, and they were, pretty much trained to try and be like social workers and sort of de-escalate him or her, if it was a her, and take the guy for a walk around the block, and nothing really changed. We did have civil restraining orders at that time, and the Thurman Tracy had restraining orders, and they'd call the police, and sometimes they'd come right away and sometimes they wouldn't. And her incident ended up in a big lawsuit, and the Torrington Police Department got sued. However, I like to come to their defense in that every police department in the state functioned in that way. And but her case, the battered women's movement, the coalitions, the DV programs in Connecticut had been working towards getting legislation, and it wasn't going anywhere. And that case, and her case, helped push it through. And then she very lovingly came back and put her efforts into the field to give back to other battered women, and volunteered at the program in Torrington. And I went with her. So one of the changes that happened several years after her case, was the law went into effect, things started happening, abusers were beginning to be held accountable, and arrests were happening. And the law also said that each domestic violence program would have a victim advocate in the court. And to this day, the law reads that way, and there is a domestic violence victim advocate that's hired and supervised by the programs, the DV programs in the courts, to help to be the voice of victims and let them know the process of the court, advocate their wishes, so on and so forth. And every year after that, the law has, we have our analysts and our researchers, and certainly in the first decade, they looked at that law and pulled it apart in many ways, and they saw that they should, and the civil restraining orders law too, they put into place what's called standing criminal protective orders, because again, Tracy Thurman helped push that through, because every year she had to refile her civil restraining order, and that put a burden on the victim to always have to remember to don't forget, let that go. So now, if there's an arrest and there's it meets the criteria for that, a victim can ask for what's called a standing criminal protective order that stays in effect for X amount of years, and it really can't change unless the victim agrees for it to be changed. So they don't have to think about going in and having that done. Other changes, there's just this year, legislation has been passed that the police officers are going to begin looking at primary aggressors, and so the law is that police officers have the ability to assess primary aggressors. In Connecticut, we have the highest rate of dual arrests, and so that means that the primary victim gets arrested along with the primary aggressor. So now we're hoping that will cut down on those types of things. So those are just a couple examples of how the law has progressed, again, looking out for the best interest of the victims in these situations. So hopefully that's going to cut down on the double arrest, because what happens if a victim gets arrested, she isn't going to call the police again. She isn't going to reach out for help again. So that's a positive thing. So our coalition and our programs look at what's happening in the forefront of the workers who are working with women and families, and then come up with a legislative agenda and things that need to be tweaked in terms of laws and practices that will better serve.
Okay, so 1986 is you're the first advocate hired in Connecticut.
Yeah, as in the court advocate, the court victim advocate, yeah.
And so this came a decade and a half after kind of like the feminist movement that kind of raised the issues of violence against women.
Well, I'm going to speak from my perspective, and I'm very fortunate. I had really good mentors who were strong feminists, and but prior to my coming into the field, Susan Schechter talks a lot about the battered women's movement and the feminist movement, and about the time in the 80s also, the medical field, the mental health field began to get involved, and there was a time, don't ask me to remember the exact time, but somewhere in that time frame, they want, the focus was on the victim, and we started hearing words like learned helplessness and battered woman syndrome. And so it was like we're diagnosing her, and why do women stay, and why do they do this, and and so that focus has been primarily on victims. Certainly from the workers and the feminists who started this movement, the focus was on them to get women and children safe. But now that that's another shift in the decades, is that today the focus is so much more on why does he do that. So today we have a bigger focus on abusers, like this law that's going to effect in July. It's to hold abusers accountable. There's many more abuser intervention programs. And I say intervention because, you can't really treat abusers because you can go into treatment and you can change behaviors, but you can't really change values. And abusers' values are they have the right to do what they're doing. And they have the right to use a systematic pattern of power and control to keep somebody in their place where they want them. And they believe that that's their right. And that really comes from our societal context, in that, men are dominant. Men, you should get what they want, how they want, when they want. And women are still culturally trained, for lack of a better word, to be the caregivers, the keep the family together givers. Backtrack a little bit and get on track. It was during this time that the mental health field wanted to put a diagnosis in the DSM-4, labeling battered women as having mental illness. And again, the movement, fought that, and thankfully that didn't happen. And there was an early researcher, Lenore Walker, who actually came up with who worked with women, wanted to explain their experience. And she came up with the cycle of abuse to explain their experience. And she used terms like learned helplessness to describe when you're in this kind of relationship, that the emotional, psychological, physical, economical abuse on a daily basis, a victim in that situation loses their sense of self. So it isn't really learned helplessness as much, but that was the terminology she used, as much as, for a lack of a better word, it's like being brainwashed. And so they lose their sense of self, and the only way they can keep going forward and to function on a daily basis and care for their children, which they do, is to sort of minimize what's happening to themselves so that they can actually function. Because I think if any battered woman who really was able to look at their trauma full force, they would have a nervous breakdown and they couldn't function. And so I think it's a safety mechanism of our brain that has us deny what's happening to some extent. And so that whole learned helplessness and wanting to put it into the DSM-4 again was that focus on victims and blame victims. And we still have some of that today. It's gotten much, much better. And so the focus now again is on abusers, and our prevention and our training of professionals and staff and volunteers is that women are the experts of their relationship. And let's not focus on why they're choosing to stay, because they have real rights and real reasons why they choose to stay. But let's focus on why he chooses to batter, because he does choose. And I'm using he and she because 94% of victims are female and 6% are male. So I'm going to use the he, she, and that's just simply the way it is. And so today we have batterers intervention programs, and I started to talk about that. You can't change values, you can change behaviors. And there's a well-known researcher who has worked with batterers who is really focusing his work, which is different because we have a lot of males that are fighting this cause with us today, which is one way that I think if we all join together, maybe we can really make social change. But his name is Lundy Bancroft, and he wrote the book Why Does He Do That? And many others. Another one is The Batterer as a Parent. And he does lots of national trainings and teachings, and he says the best deterrent for abusers to change is, for some reason, 8 months in jail. So again, the laws, everything sort of has to come together to really make this change. I think with the Me Too movement, which is a result of our societal culture that we're all trying to deal with today, it came about as a response to that. And I feel like in the battered women's movement, it has lit a fire again for that passion and that commitment, and that, okay, maybe we should stir up and make some waves once in a while to continue this movement forward. Because I do believe, in having done this work, we have moved forward. And for me, I can see that in some of the systems that we work with. When we first worked with police way back, we'd go in to do a police training because the law states they should get trained in domestic violence. We'd go in to do that, and they would take their chairs and turn them around and put their backs to us. Today, we really partner with them. There's a new initiative in the state of Connecticut, and every police department in the state is partnering with domestic violence programs, and it's called the Lethality Assessment Program, and that came out of Maryland, and I'm going to forget her name, Dr. It's an evidence-based program, and it's a lethality assessment. And so when the troopers or police go out to a scene, they ask these questions and they assess lethality. And if the victim screens in, they call the domestic violence program immediately. And that person gets to speak with an advocate on the scene to begin to talk about safety and options. And it really has decreased the amount of lethality deaths in this field.
Wow,
So that's huge.
yeah, that's huge.
So that's an example of one system and how much we've changed. I can say from my experience, again, another system is the Department of Children and Families. I mean, years ago, we were adversaries. I mean, I can remember that. And I was thinking, these are people that are charged with protecting children, but how come they don't understand if in 90% of the cases, if you get women safe, children are safe? And today we have these great liaisons with them where they go out and they really are supportive of the primary victim in these cases and help them hook up with services. And so there's been a huge change there as well. So in a lot of ways, the different systems that come into play are better. Just recently in this last, I'd say 10 years, the coalition and the 18 programs across the state have finally began to look at the civil court system. So I'll give you a quick example how that works. If you have a woman who is, the police get called, the perpetrator gets arrested, and there are children in the home, they automatically call the Department of Children and Services. And so DCF comes out and they meet with the woman, and depending on the severity of the case, they may feel that if she were to choose to return to him, that the children are in danger, and so they're strongly suggesting that she doesn't, and she gets help from the DV program. And so the woman comes to, she gets safe. She comes to the realization this isn't okay. She feels safe to leave because some women don't feel safe to leave. Right. And she's going to leave. Okay, so with DCF and the DV programs, she goes into the family court now and files for divorce. So now you have DCF saying, don't have him back in the home. We want you to protect your children. Then you get into the civil court, and now automatically they think of what's in the best interest of the children. And this is my perception, I feel it's a very antiquated definition of what's in the best interest of children, because they still think, in many cases, not all, but many, that, well, you're not together anymore, there won't be any more violence. They don't get the fact that abusers continue to abuse and use the divorce and visitation and parenting plans to still get at her. And so they sometimes, and this is what Lundy Bancroft does a lot of, he used to testify in cases where abusers were granted custody of the children. So a lot of times women choose to stay because they can monitor the safety of their children. Now you go into the family court where DCF is saying don't go back with him, but now they're saying, well, you get to turn them over to him for weekends, 20 Saturday and Sunday every other weekend, and 2 nights during the week, and it's joint custody. So it's this double-edged sword. And so the coalition was able to get some monies, and we are beginning to have some civil advocates in the civil courts to try, and there's been legislation for training for judges and all of that. So again, here's another area. In the early days of the movement, we were focused on getting women and children safe. Now that we've established and we are doing that and doing that well, the focus is now on looking at what's happening in civil courts and how do we hold batterers accountable. And looking at the impact of trauma on children and enhancing services to children who have been impacted by violence. So I think I'm sort of trying to tie from the beginning of my experience to now.
Right.
And I can't say that it hasn't gotten better. Do I miss the days of the grassroots? I absolutely do. I think that people made such commitments to this field and such passions to this field, and they made lifelong friends. And I think that it's seen much more as a professional career today, as in my perspective, rather than a passion and a cause.
Right. Have the women changed, do you think?
Have the women changed?
Are they more aware of their rights? Are they more aware of what the resources are? Or do they get more support? Is there the stigma?
I still think there's a stigma. I mean, we still have a lot of cultural change to work on and social change to work on. So yes, I do think that there's still a stigma. Have they changed? I do feel like there's more awareness, because a lot of times victims will go into the civil courts on their own now and file for restraining orders and not go through us. I mean, years ago we could have 6 people waiting to get a restraining order. That's not the case anymore. And again, another reason why we should have an advocate in the civil court. That tells me there's more awareness. Depending on how isolated they've been in the relationship, I think is dependent on how aware they are. And depending on how long and on what the continuum of violence, is it on the low end or the high end that they've experienced, and for how long, I think that depends on how they perceive themselves and perceive services. Certainly those who have experienced the far end of abuse, we know it escalates over time. Those who have been in it longer periods of time have much more of an impact. There's a lot of terms around PTSD and things like that. And certainly I see women coming in with real day-to-day effects of trauma. And it's still my feminist core belief that if they get safe, they can get grounded and they can move forward in a healthy way. And if they then need that additional help of clinical services, we reach out and work with clinicians to make those referrals. And we look for clinicians that have some kind of sensitivity and knowledge of domestic violence, because that's another area where we still have work to be done. There's some clinicians who get domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and they would not see a couple together. I mean, you don't do couples counseling. And there are still clinicians that do couples counseling, and they use a family model of therapy that can be very victim blaming. So we don't encourage couples counseling, and we educate women why. So it's another place where we still need to focus our energies.
We talked a little bit before about the HEART program. How does that fit in?
Okay, well, the HEART program HEART stands for Help End Abusive Relationship Tendencies. And I started using that program early 90s, I think, in the program where I worked in the Northwest Corner, the larger program. And at the time, it was a little controversial because it's a 12-step program that was developed by formerly battered women out of Tyler, Texas. And personally, I think that the 12 steps, Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, who created them, were geniuses way before their time. And I think if somebody really works those steps, no matter what problem you have, you'll live a healthier life if you work those steps. Now, when you transfer that into a survivor or a victim, those steps can be victim blaming in some of their wording. But I found that an excellent tool when working with women to help them begin to think critically, because women aren't allowed to think for themselves in abusive relationships. I would use that, we'd read through the step, we'd process the step. I would say, what does it mean to you? What do you think about that? And try to get them to think critically. Did it address you well? Or is there something in that statement that was victim blaming that you're going to say, well, I'm leaving that behind? So I loved the program, and I used it in the early 90s, and I am using it today. Because I think it gives women a foundation to begin to build from. I love the program. It's a self-help program.
Okay. And so you've never had anybody say, no, this is not appropriate?
Well, I think because it can be seen as victim blaming, I think some of the more grassroots people weren't really keen on it, but nobody has ever said we can't use it. No, not at all.
Okay. At this point, when you're talking about the professionalism of the field, do you feel like there's still like a community of battered women that are still trying to move things forward, or you feel like it's been kind of gone off on the professional track that's kind of like working just within there?
I think, from my lens of doing this work, that piece of, recruiting women into the field for, survivors has lessened. And some of the contracts now say you have to hire somebody with a bachelor's degree in a related field, which rules me out. I don't have a bachelor's degree. But thank goodness our coalition put in a grandfather clause that says unless you have 5 years experience in the field. That still cuts out a lot of battered women.
Right.
But here's the way I work around that. I encourage women to become involved, whether in terms of activism or coming and giving back to programs and volunteering. If they go through our volunteer program, they become certified as a domestic violence counselor, which simply covers them for the confidentiality law. And they do that and they're with us for a while. Then they can say, I've been doing this work. I have experience in this work, and they can then still come in. We used to have more statewide, I'm forgetting the term, a battered women task force, survivors task force. A lot of the individual programs across the state would recruit battered women to be on their boards. I don't think that's as active as it should be. I don't feel bad saying that. I think that could be better. Absolutely.
Had women for whom welfare made a difference, and we were at that point in the 90s trying to advocate for the old welfare laws that used to let people go to college. Spend too much money on me,
Right.
Because I put back all this, hundreds actually, probably in some cases, in terms of some of the people were so successful in their career system, and it seems like a lot of that kind of advocacy work is kind of, we kind of lost that fight, and then
I think we did lose the welfare fight.
Right, yeah.
But again, I think we've looked for different avenues to address that. There are different ways that single moms can get money to go back to college. A lot of the insurance companies have grants for single parents to go back to college. The Elizabeth Stone House in Massachusetts does a lot of work on getting survivors prepared for jobs and resumes and financial planning. There are alternative ways to look for grants, and I'm trying to think of, there's a lot of them, and I'm sorry they're not coming to my head, but There are ways. And so if I have survivors who are ready and wanting to do that, we then look for those resources.
Okay, so you feel like in terms of people looking at their future, the resources are there. They're just in a different place.
There certainly could be more of them, but that's again an area that I think we're continue to look at and figure out how we can enhance that. Women having education on financial, long-term financial sustainability and employment and careers. So it's another area that now that we know how to keep women safe, we're focusing more on the batterer. We can focus more on the long-term needs to move forward economically.
Okay. It seemed like there was like a attempt to kind of like wipe out any kind of left-leaning kind of a thing.
I think it's always a battle in terms of women and equality and women's ability to be empowered and be in positions of power in this country in general. And so I think there's always that battle, and I think we're always going to have that battle.
Okay.
I was just thinking that years ago, some of the things what I learned and how I would encourage women to learn was to read Lenore Walker's book, The Battered Woman, or to read Susan Schechter's book, The Battered Women and Men's Violence. And then there was Susan Farr, who wrote Homophobia, A Weapon of Sexism. Those were the key learning tools that were given to me by my mentors. And then I was fortunate enough to go to trainings from Ellen Pence, and I use some of her work today. But again, Ellen Pence is a leader in this field, and unfortunately we lost her, I think, a little over a year ago. So those are all women. And today, I still recommend them, but I encourage women to read Lundy Bancroft's book, almost every new person I meet. And again, Lundy Bancroft wrote Why Does He Do That? And Batterers as a Parent, and there's more. But he's a leading advocate and feminist for battered women today. And Alan Johnson, who unfortunately we lost just this December, is a strong feminist and was an advocate in this field for years. And he wrote the book, The Gender Knot. And he, before he passed, he wrote a book that was one of his first fiction, and it was called The First Thing and the Last. And if you want to hear a man who really gets the dynamics of violence against women, even though it's fiction, read it. It's incredible. You'll cry from beginning to end. So if you're early in healing, I wouldn't suggest it, but if you're a strong survivor, it's a great book. And then the last one would be Alan Katz. Any of his seminars, any of his blogs, and these are all men. And so I think that's, again, a change from early till now. And these are all strong feminist thinking men who are here and joining and partnering with us to make serious cultural change. I want to mention Jill Davies, who also wrote a book called Women Defined Advocacy. And she has been an advocate. She's a legal aid deputy in Hartford. I think her title is deputy. But she's a legal aid attorney out of Hartford Legal Aid. But she has been connected with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence for years, the whole time I've been doing this work. And she co-wrote the book, Women Defined Advocacy. And it is really that foundation of keeping the victim as the expert and that foundation of staying where they're at. Don't try to fit them into a square hole when what they want is round. And to really meet their needs, not yours. That I don't think it matters whether you have a PhD or you have a high school diploma or you don't, that this work is about partnering with the battered woman and empowering them to make choice, to be able to think critically. And no matter whether you come from the world of academia or you don't, if you aren't able to have that skill, then this work probably isn't for you. Yeah, I'm hoping to retire in the next several years, and we have a young woman where I currently work who is getting double masters. One is in women's study and the other is in social work, and she is a dynamic, strong feminist. And she has been working with me, and she uses the term, so I will use it, that I have been mentoring her. And so the succession plan has been that she'll take over my full. She works with us part time, and then she'll take over full time when I retire out. So I think that is imperative that we really mentor women, because a lot of us that have been in this field, friends that I've had the whole time I've been here, have retired and are retiring. So we need to make sure we have strong mentors to take our places.